The bells rang out over the marshes, their sound dulled by the mist that clung to the trees like a widow's veil. In the towering keep of House Urtland, a castle older than the bones buried beneath it, a child was being prepared for her wedding. Her name was Isolde. She was 12 years, 3 months, and 4 days old. Not yet a woman, but no longer allowed to be a girl. The servants moved around her in silence, as if speaking might awaken the spirits trapped in the stone walls. Her dress, a gift from her husband to be a man 4 times her age, was too heavy for her slender frame, velvet dyed with crushed beetle shells, embroidered with gold thread plucked from the cloaks of dead bishops. Her hair was combed until her scalp bled. Her lips were painted with a mixture of rose ash and powdered bone, and yet she said nothing. Her eyes remained fixed on the fire, where the coals snapped like tiny screams. Outside, the guests gathered in the courtyard, drinking warm wine and laughing at jokes too cruel to be repeated. Men with velvet coats and rotting teeth, women with pearls that choked like guilt. They came not for Isolde's happiness, but for her dowry 30 barrels of salt to vineyards, and the promise of alliance in this corner of the kingdom. Girls were not daughters, they were coins. The priest who would bless the union was blind in one, eye and half drunk on sacramental wine. He spoke of duty, of obedience, of the holiness of submission. Isolde could not understand all the words, but she understood the look in her mother's eyes like someone pushing a lamb toward the slaughter, whispering prayers she no longer believed in. Her husband arrived late, as husbands often did in such arrangements, Lord Theron of Croshold. His boots still smelled of blood from the last campaign. His left hand bore the scars of plague. When he kissed Isolde's hand, his breath was hot and thick with wine, like something crawling from a crypt. He said she would learn quickly. They always did. That night, after the candles were snuffed and the guests gone to bed, Isolde was led to the bridal chamber. The mattress was stuffed with thistle. The sheets were once white, now yellowed with old sweat and worse. She lay on the bed like an offering, and when the door creaked open, she closed her eyes and pretended to be already dead. But death would come later. It was not always like this, not entirely. There had been a time, long before, when girls were allowed to grow. But famine changes tradition, war burns innocence, and for noble houses trembling on the edge of ruin, daughters became the only currency they could still spend. Isolde's fate was not rare. In the archives of the Abbey of Nocturne, a monk once wrote, "For every battle fought by men, a girl bleeds in a bridal bed. The following days bled together like colors in a bruised sky." Isolde was not permitted to walk the gardens. She was not taught to read or write. Her duties were simple: to keep silent, to stay beautiful, to produce an heir. She failed the last, when her belly remained flat after the first moon. Her husband whispered curses into her food. The servants were instructed to feed her vinegar, to sour her womb. Her hair began to fall in clumps. Her teeth loosened. She coughed blood in the mornings, and still no one came. Her mother wrote once, a letter folded with dried violets. It said, "Endure. You are a stone now. Stones do not feel." But Isolde did feel, and each feeling hollowed her deeper. She began talking to the mirrors, not her reflection, but something behind it, a shape that flickered when the torches dimmed. She called it the other bride. The maids thought it a fever dream. They laughed behind their hands. But one by one, those same maids began to see things too. Footprints in the soot, voices whispering in locked rooms, tears leaking from stone faces in the chapel. By winter's end, Isolde had stopped speaking entirely. She walked barefoot through snow. She bit her fingernails until they bled. Her husband stopped visiting. His interest had withered with her flesh. And then, on the night of her 13th birthday, she vanished. Some say she drowned herself in the lake where the ice never fully froze. Others claim she fled into the forest, taken by wolves or angels. But the steward found her crown of bridal silver placed neatly atop the throne in the chapel, its rim flecked with blood, and tiny teeth marks as if it had been chewed by something desperate. Lord Theron remarried. Within the month, another girl. 12 again, the cycle resumed. But in the decades that followed, the name Isolde became a curse whispered among nursemaids and midwives. Girls who screamed in their sleep were said to be touched by her. Walls cracked in rooms where her name was spoken. At the edge of Croshold, no crops grew on the soil she once walked. And deep in the archives of the forgotten abbey, beside the monk's lament, another line appeared many years later, scrawled in the hand of someone unnamed. She was not the first, but she learned to return. In the year that followed Isolde's disappearance, the land surrounding Croshold did not simply grieve, it curdled. Lambs were born with no eyes. Milk turned to rot within the hour. The sky remained grey for 3 months, and even the wolves abandoned the woods. Yet the weddings did not stop. The noble houses, so burdened with debts and too proud to dig, continued the old rites. They married off daughters like sacrificial tokens, each younger than the last. There was a logic to it, they claimed. The smaller the girl, the less resistance. The less resistance, the more peace. And peace was profitable. It was during this bleak season that young Leandra of Vensmere was summoned to Croshold. She had hair like black wheat and a mind sharpened by silence. Her father, a count whose lands were sliding into swamp, promised her to Lord Theron as recompense for a broken treaty. She was 12 and 2 weeks old. She had been kissed only once by her dying nursemaid. She believed in angels, in winter stars, and in stories that said girls could one day grow into queens. On her journey to Croshold, she saw villages so empty they echoed, and fields so salt-bitten they cracked like old parchment. The driver would not speak to her. The guard who escorted her wore a badge shaped like a crow's talon, and the first thing she saw upon entering the keep was a carving on the inner gate. A girl in a wedding dress, eyes hollow, mouth stitched shut. No one admitted who had carved it. The castle had changed since Isolde's time. The walls wept with damp. Servants whispered louder, and Lord Theron himself had grown sicklier, more bloated, with a right eye that trembled like a drop of fat. Yet his hunger remained. He greeted Leandra with the same speech, the same smile, the same shaking hand. She did not flinch, but in her chest, her heart began to build a second rhythm of drumbeat that whispered, "Run." The wedding was performed in the chapel, just as before. The same pews, the same wine, the same blind priest, though now more bone than man. Leandra wore a crown made of iron-painted gold. Her veil smelled of mildew. Her dress bore the same cut as Isolde's, taken in at the ribs to fit her smaller waist. It had not been washed. When Leandra stepped into the bridal chamber, she paused. There was something waiting. Not Theron, not the servants, not even the cold. It was a stillness so dense, so hungry that it seemed to suck the breath from her mouth. Then the candle blew out. They found her the next morning, sitting upright in the bed, untouched. Her eyes were open, but her expression unreadable, calm, almost reverent. Theron refused to speak of what had happened, but his left hand now bore scratches so deep the bone was visible. He claimed it was the hound's. No one believed him. In the days that followed, Leandra changed. She walked the halls without fear. She spoke only in questions. She touched the walls as if reading Braille from the dead. Servants began to avoid her. One said they saw her in the crypts, speaking to the effigies. Another swore they heard two voices from her room, one high and clear, the other like stone dragged over iron. Then, on the 13th day of her 13th year, she died. No illness, no wound. She simply collapsed while reciting a hymn, her lips forming the final words, "Deliver us from men." Her body was cold before it hit the ground, and when the maids prepared her for burial, they found a symbol etched beneath her ribs, a tiny crown of thorns, carved with a blade too small for human hands. The funeral was brief. Lord Theron insisted it be private. No morning bells were rung, but those who glimpsed her coffin said it wept salt water, and the wind that day tasted like iron. And once again, the name joined the whispers. To girls, to brides, both gone by 13, the peasants began to say there was a curse upon the Lord's bed, that each girl he touched was claimed by something deeper, older, hidden in the stones beneath Croshold, something not born but remembered, something that fed on innocence wrapped in velvet. Lord Theron, however, remained hardened, undaunted, and before the year's end, a third bride was chosen. Her name was Cyril, and Cyril was different. She did not scream when they told her the news. She did not beg. She only asked one thing: "Does the chapel still smell like blood?" No one answered. But deep within the library of the ruined abbey, a third entry appeared in the same scrawled hand. "She is not alone anymore. Cyril was born beneath an eclipse. The midwife called it a bad omen. Her mother, Lady Enna of the Hollow Coast, called it a blessing. But her father, a man of coin and cannon, saw only an opportunity. Cyril was barely 11 when negotiations began for her betrothal. By 12, the ink was dry. By 12 and a half, she stood in the shadow of Croshold's gates, staring up at a castle that looked less like a home and more like a mausoleum. Unlike the other brides, Cyril had heard the stories. She had heard of Isolde and her silent crown, of Leandra and her iron veil, of 13 candles that went out one by one in the chapel. She had read the monk's journal stolen from the ruins of the Abbey of Nocturne. She had seen the painting hidden beneath her mother's bed, the one of a faceless girl with blood pooling beneath her bare feet. And yet she did not tremble. When they dressed her in the same velvet gown, she touched its seams and whispered to it like an old friend. When the blind priest mumbled his blessing, she stared at him so steadily that he lost his place. When Lord Theron offered his withered hand, she took it and held it too long. There was something ancient in her eyes, not old in years, but in sorrow. The wedding feast was a hollow affair. The meat was grey, the wine was thin, the laughter came from mouths that did not smile. Lord Theron barely acknowledged his new bride. He seemed tired, more corpse than lord. But Cyril watched him all night, studied him, waited. When the time came to retire, she walked the halls alone. The bridal chamber was as it had always been, cold, windowless, with the same canopy bed sagging in the middle like a broken cradle, the same mirror warped at the corners, the same silver comb left on the nightstand, still tangled with strands of black hair. But Cyril did not flinch. She touched the comb. She kissed the mirror. Then she sat on the bed and whispered, "I know you're here." And the candle beside her flickered, though no wind moved. In the silence that followed, a second voice answered, not loud, not kind, but ancient, like rocks shifting beneath a glacier, like sorrow given shape, 3 times named, 3 times claimed. Cyril nodded. "You took Isolde." She offered herself. "You took Leandra." She opened the door. "Will you take me?" The voice paused. "You already belong to me." The chamber grew colder. The walls sighed. The mirror clouded over like an eye filling with milk. And from the farthest corner of the room, something stepped forward. Not a ghost. Not a man. Not a beast. A shadow shaped like a bride. Its veil made of moth wings. Its fingers long and jointless. It had no face. But Cyril did not recoil. She stepped forward, barefoot on cold stone, and whispered the words she had memorized from the abbey texts: "Bone to ash, veil to thread, bride to worm, give back the dead." The shadow recoiled, but Cyril did not stop. She continued chanting, louder with each syllable cutting the air like a blade. The walls groaned, the mirror cracked, the bed burst into flame without fire, and then a scream, not from Cyril, not from the shadow, from below. From deep beneath the stones, where the bones of forgotten girls lay tangled in rusted bridal chains, a sound like every lost child weeping at once. And the castle shook. Lord Theron burst into the room, half-dressed, stinking of fear. He saw Cyril standing in the center of the chaos, arms raised, mouth open in fury. And he ran. He did not make it far. The hallway collapsed behind him, as if the keep itself had grown tired of his steps. By dawn, Croshold was no longer standing, just a crater, a ring of scorched earth, and at its center one girl. Alive, Cyril. She was found humming a lullaby no one recognized, her dress untouched by ash, her feet bleeding. When the peasants carried her down to the river, they asked who had saved her. "No one," she said. "We saved each other." She never returned home. She vanished into the north, where the frost keeps secrets and the stars do not blink. Some say she founded a convent for orphan girls. Others claim she became a midwife, one who refused to deliver a daughter into marriage. But one truth remained. No daughter of Croshold was ever wed again, and in the ruins of the Abbey of Nocturne, a final line was added beneath the others: the curse is not broken. It is waiting for the next man who forgets. The ashes of Croshold cooled, but its shadow did not fade. A generation passed, then two, and still. Whispers clung to the land like smoke that never learned to rise. Travellers avoided the old roads near the crater. Children born to quiet were said to have heard the final scream of the castle, and old women, stirring their pots by candlelight, told stories of 3 brides with hollow eyes, each one stolen before her first kiss. But power never truly dies. It changes shape. Far to the east, in the court of Merrowbridge, sat a man with fingers like needles and a voice smooth as wet silk. Chancellor Elric of the royal house, an adviser to kings, but loyal to none. He wore no crown, yet he held more fates in his ledger than a god. He had brokered wars with whispers, sealed peace with poison, and in the blackest pages of his journals, he wrote of the value of young flesh, not lust, not even cruelty, but leverage. A daughter, he believed, was the surest lock on any door, and if you found one pliable enough, fragile enough, she could silence a rebellion before it began. He had heard of Croshold, of course, but to him it was a superstition, a failure of control. Lord Theron had been a fool. Brutal, yes, but unsubtle. Elric would do it better. And so he began again. He sent riders into the countryside with velvet scrolls and golden promises. He scoured debt-ridden houses, widowed nobles, crumbling lineages desperate to matter. In the autumn of the Black Winds, he found her, Elina of Greythorn. She was 12, though tall for her age, with skin like rain-kissed parchment and eyes that never blinked when they should. Her father had died of boils. Her mother lived in a tower and drank memory wine until her teeth turned blue. The family crest was nearly pawned when Elric arrived. He brought with him not just coin, but the promise of restoration, land, title, protection, all for one thing, the girl. They agreed. Before sunset, Elina was placed in the House of Preparation, a manor hidden in the forest where girls were groomed to become symbols. There were no mirrors, no laughter, just endless training. How to walk with chains beneath your hem, how to cry without reddening your nose, how to bear pain and call it honor. She was not the only one there. 13 girls, all 12, all chosen, all promised. Some cried for their mothers, some tried to flee. A few died from fever or from broken things inside that no surgeon could mend. But Elina endured. She watched. She memorized. She scratched notes into the underside of her cot, names, dates, the number of steps between her chamber and the locked room with no windows. And in that locked room, something waited. It was said to be a chapel, but no priest entered. No candles were lit, and every girl, one by one, was led there on the 13th night of her 13th year and never returned. Elina counted days like a prisoner. She knew hers would come soon. On the eve of her 13th birthday, she was given a final bath, scrubbed until her skin peeled. A dress of grey silk was laid out. Her hair was braided with ash and pearl. A servant whispered, "You will be perfect. The Chancellor sees everything." That night, the door opened. 2 guards led her down the hall, past the weeping doors, past the room that smelled like dead lilies. They opened the chapel door, and there it was, a room made of white marble. All what had once been white now stained with shapes too red to be named. In the center stood a bed of stone. Above it, chains. Around it, relics, bridal veils soaked in black oil, dolls with glass eyes and no mouths, a throne carved with the names of girls whose names were never spoken again. And seated upon that throne, Elric. He did not smile. He simply said, "This is what peace costs." But Elina did not tremble. Instead, she said, "Peace is a lie," and from beneath her sleeve she drew a shard of mirror, stolen, hidden, sharpened with quiet hatred. She moved swiftly, not toward Elric but toward the bed, toward the stone, toward the very heart of whatever slept beneath this cursed room. And she carved the names of the dead. One by one. Is Alder. Leon. Dra. Cyrille. And with each name, the room groaned. The walls cracked. The floor shivered. and from beneath the marble a breath long, deep, and cold rose like fog. Elric screamed, not out of pain but realization. He had not built a chapel, he had built a doorway, and now it had opened. The girls from the other rooms heard nothing but silence. But when the sun rose, the house of preparation was gone. No smoke, no fire, just absence, and in its place a meadow where no flowers grew. Yet deep beneath that silent field, in a darkness older than kings, 13 voices whispered at once, "We remember." The silence left behind by the vanished house of preparation did not last long. Not in a kingdom ruled by records. The absence of 13 noble daughters echoed like a cathedral bell. Struck at midnight, letters were sent, messengers disappeared, mothers wailed, and fathers sharpened old swords with trembling hands. But Chancellor Elric was nowhere to be found, and so the court, always allergic to scandal, built a new narrative. The girls, they claimed, had been stolen by raiders from the north. A tragedy, yes, but a useful one. It gave the king cause for war. It gave the people a fear to feed upon. And it gave the nobility something to mourn publicly while privately wiping their ledgers clean of inconvenient heirs. But those who lived near the meadow knew better. They spoke of shadows moving at dawn, of whispers rising from soil that once slept soundly, of names carved into trees by hands that never left a mark. And once, on the 7th moon, a shepherd found a doll nailed to his barn. It wore a dress made of wedding lace. Inside its hollow head was a note, written in soot and spit. "We are not gone. We are beneath you." It was around this time that a new figure emerged from the edges of noble society. She did not give her true name. She wore a veil thicker than mourning cloth and walked with a limp as though one leg belonged to someone else, but she carried with her a ledger one identical in structure to Elric's infamous Black Book, and she knew things no stranger should know. She called herself the Widow of the 13th. She began to visit the homes of noblemen, not openly, not boldly. She arrived at night, cloaked in crowsong and fog, and always with the same words whispered through the door. "Have you measured your daughters yet?" Many mocked her, until their daughters vanished. Not in fire, not in blood dots, simply gone. Beds still warm, veils still folded, a lock of hair left on the pillow, tied with thread spun to find to be human. The widow was seen next in Arnath Hollow, where she interrupted the betrothal feast of a lord's child bride. She walked into the hall like a guest no one had invited, dragging a sack that rattled with teeth. When the guards approached, she opened her mouth and exhaled a wind so cold it turned their tongues black. She approached the girl, not yet 12, and pressed a single coin into her palm. A coin etched with a face, not a monarch, not a god, a bride. Head bowed, eyes closed, mouth sewn shut. The girl fainted. The widow disappeared. But when the bride awoke, she spoke a single sentence in a voice that was not her own. No more little queens. Fear spread faster than plague. Weddings were postponed, then cancelled. Some nobles fled the kingdom entirely, taking their daughters to distant lands. Others locked their girls away in towers, hoping steel and silence would protect them. But locks mean nothing to the dead, and the brides were dead. Make no mistake. Somewhere, beneath soil and stone, they waited, not as spirits, not as shades, but as something colder, more deliberate. They were no longer girls. They were hunger, memory, pattern, and they began to whisper to each other. Across distances no map could chart. We were 13, but there are more now. We were veiled. Now we wear iron. We were chosen. Now we choose. And far, far away, in a city built entirely of glass and arrogance, a young noblewoman named Serelith was being dressed for her wedding. She had not been told of Croshold. She had not heard the names of the vanished girls. Her mother spoke only of duty, her father of alliances, and her tutor of fertility. Serelith was 11 and 10 months old. The wedding was set for the first day of snow, but 3 nights before the ceremony, she awoke to find a doll at the foot of her bed. It wore a crown of salt, and its mouth was wide open. Inside, a single note, "We've come to dance." The doll at the foot of Serelith's bed should have been a small thing, a toy, a trinket, easily dismissed. But in the stillness of the candlelit room, its presence cracked something deep within the fabric of the world she thought she knew. It sat, upright, though no one had placed it so. Its glass eyes were missing, replaced by polished stones, and its limbs were tied at the joints with thin red thread, pulled so tight that the cloth puckered around them like scar tissue. Serelith did not scream. She was not raised to scream. She had been taught from the age of 5 how to smile with her lips but not her eyes, how to keep her back straight during sermons, to long for any child to endure, how to accept the cold touch of power and call it affection. But that night, she did not sleep again. By morning, the doll had vanished. Only the note remained, folded into a shape, resembling a bridal slipper. Her maid found it tucked beneath Serelith's pillow and foolishly read. It aloud, "We've come to dance." That maid died within the hour. Her lungs filled with lake water, though she had not left the house. And still, the wedding preparations continued. Serelith's family was too important to fail. Her betrothal was to a prince not of noble blood, but of wealth, which was more binding. The invitations had already been sent, the casks tapped, the chapel reserved. Even when the silver cutlery began to rust, and the wedding dresses in the seamstress' shop turned brittle as autumn leaves, no one paused. Only Serelith watched, waited, counted. She began seeing them at the edges of mirrors, faint silhouettes of girls in veils, eyes dark as the sea at night. Once, during a fitting, she looked down and saw muddy footprints on the floor, bare, narrow, fresh. Another time, she found her veil soaked through with tears that weren't her own. No one believed her. Not until the mourning doves flew into the chapel walls and broke their necks. Not until every bell in the city rang just once at midnight. Though no hand pulled their ropes, and still the wedding continued. On the eve of the ceremony, Serelith was bathed in milk and perfumed with lavender and ground pearl. Her skin shone like marble. Her lips were painted red with crushed berries. She wore no jewelry. As per tradition, the bride must be untouched, unspoiled, unreal. But she was real, more than real. She had remembered something buried in her. Blood. In dreams filled with dark halls and the sound of weeping metal. In whispers that said, "You are not the first." The ceremony took place at dawn. The prince waited at the altar. A boy with teeth too, bright and hands too soft. The priests mumbled. The guests smiled with eyes that never blinked. Serelith walked down the aisle with a grace not taught, but inherited from girls who had learned to walk while bleeding. She stopped only once. At the threshold of the chapel, there, upon the stone floor, was a line of salt, thin, deliberate. She stepped over it, and everything changed. The candles blew out. The stained glass cracked from within. The altar groaned. And from every shadow, every corner, every silence, they came, the brides, 13, then 20, then hundreds, faces veiled, feet bare, mouths sewn or wide open in silent screams, dresses torn, scorched, soaked, ancient. Some carried combs, others carried bones. One carried a bridal crown made entirely of teeth. They did not scream, they danced, a slow, circular motion, a spiral around the chapel, around the prince, around the guests frozen in horror. The priests fell to their knees. The noblemen bit their own tongues in terror. And Serelith, she joined them. She dropped her bouquet. She removed her veil. And she stepped into the circle with bare feet and open eyes. Her dress began to unravel on its own, thread by thread, as if returning to the earth. And the brides welcomed her not as prey, but as sister. The prince tried to flee. He did not make it to the door. They say he still dances, somewhere beyond flesh, beyond voice. The chapel was found the next morning filled with white ash. Not a soul remained, only a single shoe. Inside it, a note. Let no girl wed in silence again. The kingdom did not fall overnight. Power never collapses with a scream. It erodes, like bone left in rain, like parchment chewed by time and insects. The nobles of the eastern realms tried to forget what happened in the glass city. They sealed the chapel, burned the records, and renamed the river that ran beside it. They even commissioned a new calendar, one that would erase the year of the brides entirely. But memory is a thing with teeth. The disappearances began again. Not the girls, no. This time, it was the fathers. One by one, men who had once bartered their daughters away began vanishing from locked rooms, from horseback, from within their own guarded halls. No ransom, no remains, just silence, and in their place, symbols. A comb broken in two, a veil dipped in ash, a cradle filled with black stones, each symbol found arranged with care, as if laid out by hands too cold to tremble. The Council of Lords declared a new decree: no marriages before the age of 14. It was meant to placate the people, to prove the realm was still ruled by law, not fear. But it was too late. The fear had already learned to walk, and one day it walked into the capital. She arrived at the gates in broad daylight, on foot, dressed in armor forged not of steel, but of bridal silver, rusted rings, and strips of veil hardened with soot. Her helmet was shaped like a bishop's crown, her gauntlets stitched with names. No one dared ask her who she was, but they all saw what followed behind her, a procession of girls no older than 13, wrapped in funeral lace and carrying torches that did not burn. She did not speak. She simply stood in the square, waiting. By nightfall, the square was filled. Mothers came first, those who had buried daughters and been told to be grateful. Then midwives who remembered the ones taken too soon. Then nuns. Then sisters. Then crones. A sea of silence, held together by breath and shared grief. The girl in silver raised one hand, and from behind her cloak she drew a blade. Not long, not curved, but ancient, forged from combs, hardened in bridal blood. Its edge shimmered like tears on frost. She planted it into the cobblestone, and the ground cracked. Beneath them all, something stirred. Not a beast, not a demon, but memory. The weight of centuries of broken girls stitched into stone. And the earth wept. That night, the capital did not sleep. The nobles locked their doors, stuffed their chimneys, and whispered prayers to saints who had long since fled. But no storm came, no invasion, no fire. Just one message, carved into the cathedral door with fingernails: we are not angry. We are awake. In the days that followed, more cities saw the silver-armored girl. Always alone, always silent. She came to the houses of judges, bankers, generals. She came to ballrooms and libraries and temples. Sometimes she entered. Sometimes she only left a single object on the threshold: a piece of lace, a child's shoe, a ring made of wax. Then she vanished. But her visits left cracks, small ones at first, then deeper. Daughters stopped obeying. Mothers stopped arranging. Midwives began keeping ledgers of their, not of births, but of disappearances, and girls began telling stories to each other in whispers, of the brides beneath, of the dancer in ash, of the widow of the 13th, of the sword maid of combs, and of the one they called the last girl. Some said she had no name, others swore she had every name that was ever taken, but all agreed when she came again, it would not be with a whisper, it would be with a song, and the kingdom would forget how to lie. It began as a hum, a low, vibrating thread of sound that wove itself into the wind, curling between rooftops, slipping beneath doorways, seeping through cracks in cathedral glass. No lips moved, no singer could be found, and yet the sound grew. It was not melody, it was memory turned into vibration. In the remote abbey of St. Vale, nuns began waking at midnight with tears on their faces, and melodies on their tongues, verses they did not know in a language that predated the church. Their hands bled without wounds, their icons wept salt, and on the third night, the mother abbess placed a white veil upon the altar and said aloud, "They have begun to rise." She was burned for heresy within the week, but before the flames took her, she smiled. Far away, in a forest known only in the oldest maps as the Bone Wood, children began to vanish. Not stolen, not taken, not led. They followed the hum barefoot, unafraid. Sometimes in groups, sometimes alone. A boy of 10 followed it and returned without his eyes, but with a smile so peaceful his mother went mad. A pair of twins walked out of their home at dusk and were never seen again, but their shoes were later found side by side on the steps of the city court. filled with seeds that bloomed into black roses. Then came the drawings, charcoal sketches appearing overnight on walls, in schools, in nursery books. Always the same image, a circle of faceless girls in veils, arms interlocked, dancing around a tower made of combs and bones. In the center, a throne empty, always empty, except once. In the city of Hallworth, a child's drawing was found in the palace courtyard, etched into the stone itself. This time, the throne was not empty. Upon it sat a girl with a stitched mouth, holding a lantern that dripped blood instead of light. The royal court ordered the stone removed. It shattered on touch, and from the fracture rose a sound, not a scream, but a sigh so old it turned milk sour and wilted every flower in the garden. The Queen of Hallworth miscarried that night, and her daughter, born still, was buried with a doll in her arms, a doll that none of the nurses had placed there. By then, it was clear the brides were no longer simply haunting. They were remembering, reclaiming. Each act, each hum, each shadow was not revenge. It was ritual, and it was building. In the west, the river ran backward for one night, carrying wedding rings downstream where fish choked on them. In the east, the mountains echoed with a cry no throat could have made. In the north, where frost and sorrow were closest cousins, a castle crumbled not from siege, but from the weight of unseen footsteps, pacing its halls again and again for hundreds of years. They were coming, and they would not arrive with torches or swords. They had no armies. They needed none. They had memory, and memory makes ruins of all things eventually. There is a chair that no one sits in, not because it is broken, not because it is forbidden, but because every time someone tries, they bleed. It sits in the upper chamber of the abandoned manor, at Gorthwick Hollow, a once prosperous estate where 15 noble daughters were married in less than a decade, each one younger than the last. The chair was carved from dark hue, lacquered with sap and sorrow, etched with symbols so faint they shift when you stare too long. No cushions, no softness, just a curve in the wood, like a waiting mouth. The locals call it the waiting bride. Once, a historian tried to document its origins. She entered the manor at dusk and never returned. Her journal was later found open on the step, soaked in river water though the nearest stream was miles away. On the final page, a sketch of the chair and written beneath it, not in her hand, she sat. Now she listens. Others claimed the chair moved, that on moonless nights it turned slightly toward the window, that sometimes in the mornings its legs left drag marks in the dust, and only once a stable boy claimed to see a girl sitting in it, brushing her hair with a comb made of wasp wings. He went mute after that. The chair became a warning, a relic, an object of dread. But dread was no longer enough, because across the realm more chairs were appearing, in homes that had hosted secret weddings, in palaces that signed treaties with blood, in taverns where girls were promised away with a cup of ale and a nod. Always the same shape, always empty, until the night of 13 storms, a night when thunder did not roll but scream, when lightning struck 13 bridal towers in 13 cities, reducing lace and stone to ash, and when the rain stopped, in every place where a bride had once cried quietly before being given away, a chair stood, no longer empty. They were sitting now, the brides, not in flesh, not in bone, but in presence. You could not see them, not fully, but the air changed around the chairs, became to still, to cold. Mirrors walked, clocks ran backward, ink refused to dry, and the scent of burnt milk lingered like perfume. One noblewoman, desperate to lift the curse from her house, offered her own daughter as a gift to the unseen presence. She vanished. The chair did not, and in its seat, the mother later found a note folded in the shape of a cradle. No more thrones built on silence. The presence grew bolder. In the grand cathedral of Elkinridge, where brides were crowned before their wedding feasts, the main pews began to splinter, not from rot, from rejection. They said the wood remembered. And in the cloister garden, every rose bush began blooming black. Then came the joyless wedding, a spectacle meant to reclaim tradition. Hundreds gathered. The king himself presided. The bride, a girl of noble blood, dressed in silver and white, stood beside her chosen husband, the organ played, though that no voice followed. The choir had vanished, all 13 singers gone. And when the priest turned to the bride, she was weeping not with tears, but with blood, not her own. No one knows who screamed first, but the chapel cracked down the centre. The bells exploded from their tower, and the groom was never found. Just a shoe. Inside, a comb. And beneath the altar, a chair, facing the king, waiting. The dress was made of moon thread, or so the story claimed, spun not by hands but by breath, dyed with the milk of poppies and the tears of girls who had never learned to scream. It shimmered in the dark, not like silk or silver, but like something alive pretending to be still. It was displayed behind glass in the royal vault of Asterholder Relic of Power, untouched for nearly a century. They said it had been made for a girl whose name was erased from the records, whose portrait was burned, whose shadow had been scratched from stone. The dress was all that remained of her, and yet it was flawless, untouched by time, unspoiled by moths. It hung from its stand like a bride waiting to be remembered. Then, one morning, the vault door was open. The guards swore it had not been forced, but the dress was gone, and in its place was a mirror cracked, smoke-stained and utterly still, not reflecting the room, but something else entirely. A hallway, a chapel, a door. One by one, those who looked into it began to speak the same phrase. She's still walking toward the altar. Word of the vanished dress spread like fire through the realm. At first, it was treated as a theft, a scandal. The Queen herself issued a decree. Any who found the gown would be granted land, title, and gold. But no one could find it, because the dress was no longer an object. It had become an idea. It began to appear in dreams, first among girls, then boys, then women, then mothers who had never born daughters. Always the same image, a girl standing in a room of ash, pulling the dress over her head as if preparing for something she never agreed to. And then, always, a single drop of blood falling, not from the dress but from the air. In the western village of Varenholt, 13 girls were found sleepwalking on the same night. All walked to the edge of a frozen lake. All wore white. None had ever seen the real dress, and yet they described it in perfect detail. A collar high enough to choke, sleeves long enough to bind, a waist so tight it bruised the ribs of memory. When asked how they knew what to wear, they simply answered, "She showed us." One girl, the youngest, whispered something more. "She's sewing a new dress, one for all of us." Panic returned. This time, it was the nobility who began to fall apart. They burned their daughters' gowns, closed the bridal academies, tore down portraits of girlhood and replaced them with paintings of battle. But it was too late. The dress had already walked into their halls, sometimes seen in the periphery, trailing behind a mirror, sometimes laid out neatly on a bed that had never been slept in. Once, it was found crumpled on a ballroom floor still warm, as if someone had just stepped out of it. The Countess of Brelmere slit her own wrists after finding it folded in her child's cradle, and when they lifted her body, her blood had formed 13 names across the floor. No one could read them, except the midwife. She read them aloud, then bit off her own tongue. In the cloister of the Unseen Sisters, the head nun declared, "It is not a curse. It is a garment, and garments are worn by those called." The following morning, she walked naked into the forest and was never found. Only her veil returned, folded with care, soaked in something dark. The dress still has no owner, but it is being fitted, patiently, one stitch at a time. There are lakes that remember, not with words, not with reason, but with reflection. One such lake lies between the skeletal pines of Lawnmere Vale. It has no name, only nicknames: the bride's eye, the drowned veil, the glass that screams. No one drinks from it. Animals won't cross it. Birds avoid its windless shore. It is not deep, but no one has ever touched its bottom. They say the water does not reflect the world above but the world beneath, the one we buried. A century ago, the people of Lawnmere Vale drowned their daughters, not from cruelty, but fear. A prophecy, carved into the stone wall of a forgotten chapel, had warned, "The 13th bride shall open the gate." And when their noble lord married 12 girls before the moon turned red, the villagers panicked. They looked to their daughters young, wide-eyed, untouched by guilt, and saw only doom. In the final days of autumn, they carried the girls in silence down to the lake. Not one screamed, not one fought. Some say they walked into the water themselves. Some say they were called. Afterward, the villagers built 13 cairns from white stones along the bank. For each, a bridal ribbon was tied and left to fray in the wind. But none frayed. They remained there still, untouched, as if time itself dared not tug them. And now the lake has begun to speak, not aloud, but in surface. The water no longer shows the sky, no longer the trees, only faces, girls with sewn lips, girls with crown-braided hair, girls who blink slowly, not in mourning, but in memory. A child, just 9, wandered to the lake last winter. Her parents were dead. She had no name, only a torn locket and a song she hummed in her sleep. She gazed into the water and whispered, "I'm not ready." The water rippled, and the face beneath her own smiled, not cruelly, not kindly, just knowingly. When the villagers found the child hours later, she was asleep on the bank. In her hand was a veil, black lace, hand-stitched, to find for any thread known to this land. They burned it. 3 days later, every mirror in the village shattered. No one was hurt. No glass struck flesh, but every mirror left the same final image behind, etched in their cracked surfaces like frost. A girl, dressed for her wedding, standing in the lake dock waiting. In the Abbey of Derrent Hollow, the last mirror maker of the region went blind. He claimed it was not disease, but mercy. He had seen too much. He spoke of reflections out of sync, brides moving their heads a moment too late, fingers that twitched before they should, and once a hand on his shoulder from inside the glass. Before he died, he left one sentence carved into the back of a bronze mirror: "She sees who looks." The noble courts, now in full retreat, outlawed all new glasswork, but the damage was done. Girls across the realm had begun looking, and the lake began whispering back, not in sound, but in dream. They began drawing their own reflections, not as they were, but as they would be, clad in ash, veil pulled low, fingers interlocked with shadows. One girl, just 12, painted her portrait in oils with her eyes closed. When finished, it showed her standing in the center of Lawnmere Vale, though she had never been there, with 13 veiled figures behind her, each missing their right hand. When her mother saw it, she tried to burn the painting. The fire refused. The canvas would not burn, and the girl spoke in a voice not hers. "The water remembers the ones you buried." There is a corridor in the ruined monastery of Virel, the kind of place no map admits, no historian defends, and no God ever blessed. Travelers stumble upon it only by accident, and when they do, they speak of a single hallway at its heart, narrow, uneven, alive with rot. Its walls were once white, but are now stained the color of dried plum and rusted breath. The air smells like old silk, and something beneath its hour, iron, maternal. Most don't reach the end. They turn back, claiming to hear a sound behind the stones, a heartbeat. Or, no, 13. 13 faint, synchronized thuds, all on one side of the wall. A few have stayed. They dig with fingernails, with teeth, with rusted relics pulled from crumbled altars. And once the stone yields, always softer than it should be, they find them, arms 13. Always 13, small, delicate, like those of girls just past childhood. Pale as candle wax, sleeves still intact, stitched with bridal lace and mother's prayers. Some are curled as if they had been folded against their chest. Others reach outward, palm up, forever waiting. Each arm ends at the elbow, each one fused into the wall, as if the monastery had swallowed them whole. No bodies, no blood, just arms, and the stone remembers their names, not carved, not written, but felt. When touched, the wall whispers not in words, but in memories, hair being braided by candlelight, rings slid onto hands that did not want them, lullabies sung in languages never written down. One of the arms wears a ring. It is not gold, not iron, not bone. It is made of hair, braided, bound, soaked in salt and shadow. When one traveler touched it, she screamed until her tongue split. After that, the ruins were declared cursed. But curses don't matter when memory becomes ritual, because now The arms have begun to appear elsewhere. At first, they were only seen by children. Arms reaching out from under beds, from beneath old pews, from the seams of cracked ceilings. Always the same shape, same softness, same lace. They never grab. They only offer, palms up, an invitation. In the court of the last Southern Duchess, a hand reached out from the library hearth and placed a doll into the lap of the Duchess's newborn granddaughter. The doll was dressed in a veil made of fishbone. Its mouth was a seam, its eyes to drops of black wax. The Duchess wept, not from fear, from recognition. She had worn the same veil once when she was 12. The arms are not haunting. They are rebuilding, thread by thread, limb by limb, bride by bride. And they are not asking for rescue. They are asking for witness, for a world that looked away to look again and not blink this time. Now, when girls begin to dream, they see hands 13 of them reaching toward them through the veil of sleep. Not dragging, not grasping, offering, a brush, a thread, a comb, a dress, and a choice. And in the old tongue, the one no one teaches anymore, a voice follows, say yes and remember, say no and forget. And the girls who say yes, they wake up with lace under their fingernails. It was said the first comb was carved from regret, not wood, not ivory, but from the bone of a mother who sold her daughter's silence for a ring of grain and a place at court. It was simple 8 long teeth, curved to mimic a swan's neck, polished to a glimmering pearl. But when held, it was warm. When used, it sang. And when pressed to a girl's scalp, it whispered her true name, the one stolen from her when she was veiled, when she was priced, when she was led down the aisle before she had learned to bleed. That comb vanished centuries ago, but it has been remade again and again, because every time a girl is taken before her time, every time a name is erased, a new comb is carved, not by hands but by consequence. They appear without origin, in drawers, beneath pillows, in old cradles long abandoned, each one different, some with teeth like needles, others smooth as lullabies, but all of them carry the same hum, a hum like breath held too long, a hum like a choir with no mouths. In the Manor of Marigolan, where 3 generations of daughters were married before their 12th birthday, a maid found such a comb tangled in her mistress's hair. It had not been there the night before. She tried to remove it. It would not move. The girl awoke screaming, not from pain but from memory. Not hers. Hers, one of the bride's. She spoke in a tongue that had no vowels, a tongue made of rust, lullaby, and rope. Her eyes rolled back, her mouth foamed with salt, and when she stilled, the comb fell into her lap. Its teeth were bleeding. The maid disappeared before sunrise. In the Abbey's records, there is a list, short, precise, and unadorned. It names 37 noble houses, all of them touched by what the clergy called the bridal affliction. They never use the word curse or haunting. They dare not. Next to each house is an object catalogued and sealed, a doll with a mouth sewn in iron thread, a shoe filled with ash and rose petals, a pillowcase embroidered with the phrase, "I waited, Mama, I waited," a bridal comb. They are all stored in the vault beneath the archive of daughters, a place no one enters. Not anymore, because recently the objects moved, not all at once, but gradually. The combs first. The archivist reported 1 went missing, then 3, then 13. She ordered the shelves, reinforced, iron nails, salt lines, thorns from the gravewood forest. Still they vanished, and one morning she found a single braid on her desk looped in a perfect circle. In the center, a new comb, carved from obsidian, light as breath, cold as morning, and on its spine, etched in a script long outlawed, "Every time you forget us, another tooth grows." Comb by comb, the network builds. Girls find them in the margins, in ruinous dreams. And they do not fear them. They use them. They sit before cracked mirrors, before wells, before nothing at all. And they pull the comb through their hair, slow, deliberate ritual. With each stroke, they remember the name they were born with, the song their nurse hummed before being dismissed, the feel of silk ropes around their wrists the night before the wedding. And when the 13th stroke is done, the girl is no longer alone. In the reflection behind her, the brides, their mouths may be sewn, but their eyes are wide open, and they are watching her become one of them. It was meant to be a celebration, a golden evening in the palace of the Eastern March, where banners fluttered like sighs and the sky wore its finest velvet. The heir of House Othran, a boy of 16, with a voice like buttered charm, was to be engaged that night to Lady Meravine's youngest daughter, Lys. She was 12. They dressed her in lavender, fed her candied almonds and words she barely understood. Her feet were bound in slippers too small, her smile practiced in a mirror held by a maid who trembled the whole time. She did not speak. She had not spoken in weeks. Her mother called it grace. Her father called it obedience. But in truth, Lys was listening. She had heard the voices in the walls, felt the chill when no windows were open, and sometimes, in the bathwater, she saw faces that weren't hers, girls with mouths stitched in gold thread, eyes hollow but burning. And now she was being presented like a gift to a boy who already had 6 horses and 2 mistresses. The hall glittered with cruelty. Music played. Platters steamed. Nobles drank from goblets carved with names of saints they'd never honored. The archbishop blessed the union with a prayer that sounded suspiciously like a bargain. And then, at the stroke of the 13th bell, the candles went out. Not all at once, one by one, as if blown by unseen lips. As darkness settled like a veil, guests shifted. A murmur bloomed, and from the far end of the hall where the floor met her shadowed corridor came the sound of footsteps. Slow, bare, too many, then silence, and then the music returned. But not the same. The violins were wrong, too sharp, the rhythm strange, dissonant, and worst of all, it came from nowhere. The musicians were frozen, instruments untouched. The guests turned to the days. Where Lys once stood, there was now only her dress, still upright, still shaped by something, but empty. Sewn into the bodice was a note, stitched not with thread, but with hair. She declined your invitation. Panic spread like oil across flame, but the doors would not open. The nobles screamed "Dot Claude," fled from shadows that had no feet, and then through the stained glass windows she entered. Not Lys, them, the brides. They did not break the glass. It folded for them, like paper, like apology. They walked across the tables with bare, bleeding feet. Each step left no wound, only silence. No one could scream. They had taken the sound. One bride reached the high table, touched the groom to be on the lips. He collapsed, not dead, not sleeping, but emptied. He would never speak again. His voice now belonged to something deeper. When the guards finally broke down the doors the next morning, they found every guest slumped at their places, eyes wide, hands folded, mouths sewn shut with silver thread. Except one, the archbishop. He sat at the head of the table, gnawing silently at a bouquet of funeral lilies. On the wall behind him, written in dripping ink made of rust, "This is not a wedding. This is a reckoning." And beneath the table, curled around the base like a forgotten ribbon, was the comb. Lys was never found, but girls across the realm began waking with her name stitched into their pillowcases. Even those who had never heard of her, even those who had no voice to say it, even those who had no tongue at all. The kingdom had no graves for them, no stones etched with names, no crypts sealed with candles and prayers, no hymns sung over soil still trembling. The brides were not buried, they were erased. Absences written over with prettier stories, fever, wolves, accidents, unfortunate drownings. But the earth does not forget, and neither do the bones. At the edge of the cradle wood where the wind weeps without leaves, and the trees lean just a little too closely, there is a field where nothing grows. It was once a wedding ground, they say, a place where the nobility sent their youngest to be married under moonlight, far from city eyes. There is no chapel there now, just a circle of stones and the faint scent of milk and rot. For years it lay undisturbed, until the shepherds started hearing music, not from instruments, from underneath, low tones, a humming vibration, like a choir being sung through teeth and time, and with it The ground began to shift, not break, not quake, but pulse, as if something beneath it was breathing. They called it the bride field, and those who stood long on its soil said they felt footsteps rise through their boots. Not walking, not dancing, always in circles, always 13. Then came the graves, not dug, not carved, simply opened, perfect oval indentations, as if a body had once lain there and gotten up. Some were small, child-sized, others narrow and long, all empty, except one. In it sat a comb. Its teeth were made of wedding pins. On its spine, a name, but not one spoken aloud for generations. It belonged to the first bride, the one whose heart was sewn shut so she would not scream during the marriage rite, the one who bled into the hem of her veil until it bloomed red, the one who started the quiet rebellion beneath the soil. She had no name now. She had become them all. That night, the stars vanished above the bride field. No clouds, no storm, just the absence of heaven. And the next morning, a new ring of footprints had formed around the stones. Around the old graves, 13 girls, 13 new brides, each one dressed in fragments cobweb, silk, scorched lace, thread made of crow feathers. No one saw them come, no one saw them leave. But in every village nearby, young girls awoke with a new word on their tongue. Not a name, a title. She who waits. The clergy tried to consecrate the land. They brought oil, fire, relics stolen from shrines. Nothing worked. The moment the chants began, the priests lost their balance. The ground rejected them. One was swallowed to the waist and wept like a child, until the earth spat him back up, his hair turned white, his mouth sown with thorn. And on the stone where he'd knelt, a message burned itself into moss. Your altars took us. Your soil kept us. Your memory failed us. Now the girls speak to the ground. They kneel beside root and ash, whisper into the hollows, press their palms to the dirt. And the dirt answers, with pulse, with presence, with a silence too heavy to be empty. There are no graves, but there is a reckoning, one step at a time, one bride at a time, each one dancing her way back into the world that tried to bury her. There is a room in every noble house, small, hidden, always locked. Sometimes it's behind a false panel in the nursery, sometimes beneath a stairwell that leads nowhere. Once, it was found in the ceiling of a ballroom, sealed behind velvet and prayer. It goes by many names: the spare room, the silence chamber, the bridal hollow. But among the servants, it has only one title: the room she waits in. It is not built, it becomes. Each time a contract is signed to wed a girl too young to understand what is being given away, the room appears, quietly dot without sound or ceremony. And no matter how new the manor, how secular the home, how far from tradition the room is always there. It contains no bed, no mirror, only a chair, a veil, a candle, and a comb. The veil is grey not from age, but from mourning. It hangs from nothing, suspended in air like a held breath. The candle burns with a flame to steady, as if wind has never been allowed near it. The comb lies beside the chair, its teeth sharp enough to draw blood if touched without permission. And yet the room does not frighten the girls, because they've already seen it. In dreams, in drawings, in stories half whispered behind cathedral doors. They know its shape. They know it's not waiting to harm them. It's waiting to remind them. Lady Annemire of Krell's youngest daughter found the room the night before her 12th birthday. She said she followed music down a hallway that wasn't there the day before. Inside, she saw herself older, veiled, brushing her hair in silence. When she reached out to touch the comb, the flame of the candle turned black, and the reflection whispered, "Don't let them dress you yet." The next morning, the girl had gone mute, not broken, not choosing. Her mother found a note stitched into the hem of her nightdress. It was not written in ink. It was made of letters formed from loose baby teeth. "I'm not ready." They sent for priests, for doctors, for charm breakers and speech healers. Nothing worked. And then, a year later, the girl spoke again. Only once. At her 13th birthday feast, surrounded by guests and golden wine, she rose, looked her father in the eye and said, "I am the room now." She vanished before dessert. In her place, a veil, still warm. They say the room appears more often now, not just in noble houses, in schools, in bathhouses, in bell towers, wherever a girl is told to be smaller, to be grateful, to be quiet. It comes in dream, in instinct, in the hollow behind the walls, and each time something is left behind a button, a ribbon, a drop of candle wax shaped like an eye. But no girl who sees it comes away the same. They wake changed, not louder, not angrier, but remembered, as if the room had said, "You are not alone. You are not the first. You are not finished." Now, even the walls know her name. Even the silence holds her breath. And as the girls find the room again and again alone, afraid, awakening, they begin to braid their hair not in beauty, but in preparation. And the combs? They no longer draw blood. They draw memory. And memory is sharper than any blade. Once a year, in the opulent capital of Aranthia, the noble houses gather for a festival said to predate the crown itself. They call it Florentide the Blooming, a week of music, parades, and spectacle, where daughters of the realm are dressed in white and led through the streets in garlands and lace, praised for their purity, their grace, their promise. They say it is a tribute to the goddess of spring, but everyone knows better. It is a market, a parade of inventory. Behind every smile is a calculation: how much dowry, how much land, how many titles might a girl's silence fetch? And beneath every gown is a contract not yet signed. For centuries, Florentide has been the first glimpse many noblemen get of the girls they will later wed. Some as young as 9, veiled in silk so heavy it was down their breath. Some with eyes wide and blank, having been told not to speak, not to laugh, not to step out of line lest the wrong man look away. They are called blossoms, but no one asks what happens to a flower when it is picked too soon. This year, something changed. On the third day of the festival, during the great procession of the blossoms, where 100 girls walked hand in hand through the central avenue, the first rose did not open. Tradition dictates that as the procession passes beneath the temple arch, a breeze stirs the flower garlands and causes the white roses to bloom, a sign of favor, of youth blessed by divine breath. But this year, the roses stayed closed, then wilted, then turned black. People thought it was a trick, a failed enchantment, a prank by rebels or heretics, until the girls began to drop not dead, not ill, just gone. One by one, they vanished mid-step, their veils falling to the ground like molted skin, their dresses crumpling like ash. No sound, no flash, just absence. Of the 100 blossoms, 13 disappeared. The crowd froze. No one moved, except the wind, a new wind. It came not from the sky, but from beneath, a slow, rising breath that rustled the banners and stirred the prayer ribbons tied along the temple gates. And then laughter, soft, unfamiliar, not cruel, but knowing. It came from the mouths of the remaining girls. They did not scream. They did not panic. They smiled and walked forward. Each one plucked a withered rose from her own crown and tossed it to the ground as if discarding a chain. Then they sang, a song no one could understand, a song with no words, a melody braided from shadow and sugar and salt and centuries. By the time they reached the temple steps, the crowd had begun to retreat, not from fear of violence but from recognition. Everyone had heard the song before. They just didn't remember where. That night, the palace awoke to an infestation, not of insects or beasts, of petals. White rose petals dried, crumbling, sour sweet with decay filled every hallway. No one saw where they came from. No one saw who left them. But within hours, the entire west wing of the royal archive was choked in them. And in the center of the scroll chamber, on a plinth where a list of marriage contracts had once been proudly displayed, was a single velvet box. Inside, a rose, not dead, not alive, not a rose, but made from lace, and within its folds 13 names. None of them belonged to the vanished girls. All of them belonged to the men who once promised to wed them. All of them were already dead. Some for years, some for centuries. The oldest had been buried so long ago that his bones had become part of the foundation of the palace itself, and yet his name was warm, as if it had only just been spoken. There are stories too shameful to speak aloud, so they are sown instead, in the province of Meltris, where the last file-makers once plied their trade. A quiet tradition endured for centuries. For every bridal veil commissioned by a noble family, a second was always made in secret, never ordered, never paid for. It was stitched at night, with thread dyed not in colour, but in memory, crushed lavender for stolen breath, crushed bone for silence, rust for dried blood, and candle soot for dreams unspoken. But the second veil was never worn. It was hidden, folded 12 times and stitched into the lining of the first gown, or buried beneath the half of the girl's bedroom, or, in the rarest cases, burnt in the middle of the night when the bride herself begged for forgetting. They called it the veil of truth. Not one survives, except one. It was found in the remains of the vial-maker S-Quarter, after the fire tucked inside a soot-blackened hope chest that refused to burn. When opened, the air turned cold. Not cold like weather, cold like morning. Inside lay the veil, intact, untouched by flame. It shimmered not white, but grey or foggy, trembling grey, like breath caught behind a mirror. And on the inside, where only the bride would ever feel it against her skin, words had been sewn. Thousands of words tiny tight. So small they looked like texture until seen under glass, a story. No beginning no end. Just moments. A girl braiding her sister's hair the night before she was sold. A bride biting her own tongue during the wedding rite to stop herself from naming the man who hurt her. A mother whispering to her daughter, "Smile, he paid well." And between each line 13 stitches in red. 13 like a heartbeat. 13 like a countdown. 13 like a warning. When scholars examined the veil, they laughed, called it hysteria. Folklore, feminine madness preserved in fabric. One even dared to wear it. He stood before a mirror, joking about bridal curses and the price of silk. Then, suddenly, silence! His mouth stopped moving, but his reflection did not. It kept talking, whispering. The words weren't his, they were hers. The mirror cracked not from outside, but from within. And when they pulled the veil from his head, his eyes had turned to thread. He never spoke again, and the veil, gone. But the message remained. Because now the veils have begun speaking in other ways, not sewn, unraveling. Girls across the realm have found old wedding veils, those of grandmothers, aunts, strangers, and watched them come apart in their hands, seam by seam, row by row, but not in decay, in purpose, because beneath the outer veil, hidden in the folds, are stories, names, phrases, bits of breath caught in fabric. I was not ready. He held the knife like a gift. They told me I was lucky. One girl found a scrap that simply said, "She's still walking," and another, "In golden thread, when the 13th veil is read, the world will remember." Now the vial makers, those who still work quietly in cellars and cloisters, have begun making second veils again. Not in secret, in defiance. They leave them in public wells, in the crooks of trees, folded into hymn books, tucked behind altar cloths, waiting for the hands that know how to read them, hands that have combed silence into hair, hands that no longer tremble when they tie the ribbon, hands that know a wedding dress is not a covenant, but a cage, and veils, they are not symbols of beauty, they are shrouds. There is a chamber beneath the oldest cathedral in the kingdom, a place never marked on any map, never mentioned in sermons, never spoken of above a whisper. The sisters who tend the cathedral call it the bridal cloister, but only when they think no one can hear. There is no door. You must be led down 27 steps of stone polished by centuries of weeping feet, through an arch that bleeds shadow even at noon, and into a room that feels not built but confessed. No candles burn here, no prayers echo. It is a room of pure silence, so thick it presses against the skin like cloth soaked in oil. The air smells of lavender and rot, and in the center, resting on a dais carved from bone, is a book. Its cover is skin, not metaphorically. It is smooth and pale and soft as the inside of a child's wrist. It is warm, it breathes, it opens itself when it wishes. The sisters do not touch it. They kneel around it, heads bowed, eyes shut. They call it the Register of Unwed Widows, because within its pages are names, thousands of them, some written in ink, others in blood, a few in thread, stitched so delicately it takes hours to see the full name. All belonged to girls who were wed but never returned. Married, yes, but made into ghosts before the ink on their contracts dried. Their names were forgotten by family, erased from records, scrubbed from stone. But the book remembers, and worse, it writes new names on its own. Late at night, when no one dares enter the chamber, the book sighs, pages rustle, and a fresh name appears. Always a girl, always young, always a bride. Sometimes the name is one no one recognizes. Sometimes it is the name of a girl still alive, still smiling, still unaware. One sister once dared to tear a page from the book. She burned it at the foot of the altar, reciting every protective rite she had ever been taught. The flame hissed, the page curled, turned to ash, and then, at dawn, she was found in her cell. Every name from the book carved into her skin, not with a knife, with a comb. Each wound bled silver. She was still breathing when they buried her, still whispering one sentence, "The door is in the name." Scholars have tried to enter the chamber. Nobles have offered bribes. Kings have demanded to see the book. All were denied. But one queen, long widowed, childless, and too clever to be ignored, was granted entrance after she arrived in mourning garb and did not speak a word. She stayed in the chamber for 13 hours. When she emerged, her hair had turned white. She did not return to court. Instead, she vanished from public life, but weeks later, in every town square, chapel, and cathedral across the kingdom, identical broadsheets appeared. They bore no images, no symbols, only a list. 1,300 names. At the bottom, the brides remember, and beneath that, in a different hand, "If your daughter's name is not here, ask why." Now, every night, across the land, the names continue to appear, scratched into frost on windows, stitched into the hems of nightgowns, carved into wood beneath cradles. Girls find them, whisper them, learn them like prayers, not to forget, but to be ready, because the book does not lie. It writes in sorrow, yes, but never in error, and the chamber waits, not for repentance, for reunion, because when the last name is written, the room will no longer be silent. It will sing, and its song will be made of all the voices stolen beneath the veil. Before the empire had cathedrals, before brides were veiled, before the first dowry was measured in sheep and land, there were only songs, and they were not sung by kings, they were sung by mothers, women who wove lullabies not from melody, but from memory fragments of warning, stitched into the breath between cradle and night. They sang to daughters still red with birth, to girls who asked where the blood went when it left, to young brides who trembled in silk not chosen, but the songs were taken, one by one, silenced by parchment, by coin, by vow, because lullabies carry memory, and memory is rebellion. The last known cradle song was heard in the village of Halfmere, where the river forks like a wishbone and the night birds never sleep. A girl named Ray, barely 12, already betrothed, was found sitting on the chapel steps at midnight, her mouth sewn shut with wedding thread, not by force, by her own hand. The needle was still there, stuck through her palm, shaking slightly in the wind. Around her, the stones were wet not with blood, but with milk, old milk, sour, maternal. No one dared approach her until morning. When they did, she was still humming, a sound low and steady, like breath through torn silk. An old woman blind since birth stepped forward and listened. She wept. "It's the first song," she whispered, "the one we lost." And then she began to hum. Others joined. Not many. Only women. Only those who remembered what it felt like to wake with your voice, already buried under someone else's promise. Within days, the humming had spread. Across towns, across provinces, into cities where mothers had long stopped singing because their daughters were taken too young to be held. No one knew the words, only the tune, but it changed things, because every time it was sung, something responded. Mirrors rippled, candles dimmed, old toys moved, and always, always the same thing, a veil in the corner of the room, trembling as if caught in a wind that no one else could feel. Some began calling it the milk song. Others called it the bride's breath. But the girls who sang it in secret had a different name, Mother's Refusal. They did not sing it for comfort. They sang it for return. And return it did in the great city of Arlithane. 13 girls went missing from their bridal academies. Not stolen, not spirited, simply absent. Their beds were still warm, their books still open, but in their place left on every pillow was the same thing, a single glass bead, cloudy white, wrapped in a loop of braided hair. Inside the bead, a humming sound. When held to the ear, it played the song, but not as a tune, as a voice. Their voices, speaking not in fear, but in command. You sewed our mouths, but you forgot our breath. Now, mothers who were once silent begin to rock their children again, not to sleep, but to waking. They hum the song in kitchens, in fields, in chambers where no man walks, and their daughters hum back. The lullaby is no longer a farewell. It is a call to memory, a summoning of every bride who was ever hushed, who ever bled beneath a dress she could not choose, who ever waited at an altar for a future carved in stone instead of sky. And in every corner of every home where the song is heard, a veil lifts. Not off a head, off a name. And the girls who bear those names, they are not afraid. They are listening. Because this is not a lullaby to sleep. It is the beginning of something that no cradle can contain. In the village of Old Wenhollow, buried deep in the forest where even moonlight hesitates, there is a well with no bottom. Not metaphorically. They have tried. Lowered ropes, lanterns, stones marked with ink, all fall endlessly, never heard again. No splash, no echo, only silence. The locals call it the widow's eye. They say it was dug by 13 mothers whose daughters never returned from their weddings. One by one they came in the night, veiled not in mourning, but in dirt barefoot, breathless, carrying nothing but a rusted ladle and a name. They didn't speak. They didn't cry. They simply dug. No one knows how long they worked. No one dared watch. But when dawn came, the well stood open, black, still, waiting. They say it does not give water. It gives memory. Not the kind you remember, the kind that remembers you. A girl named Thalia once peered into it on the eve of her 13th birthday. She had just been gifted a wedding dress still folded, still smelling of lavender, and Starchan told that her life would change in the morning. She ran to the forest. No one saw her leave. When she returned, hours later, her hands were soaked in cold dew, and her eyes had gone the color of pearl. She said nothing, only wrote one sentence on her bedroom wall in chalk mixed with ash. The well is not a mouth. It is a mirror turned inside out. She never spoke again, but birds began gathering on her windowsill at night, 13 at a time. Not songbirds, not doves, crows, each with a ribbon in its beak, each ribbon embroidered with a name, not hers. Hers, theirs, the bride's. Since then, the villagers have kept away from the widow's eye. They built fences, then walls, then a chapel atop it, thinking perhaps faith might suffocate the memory. It didn't. The well reappeared, not physically, but in copies, in other villages, in dreams, in floorboards that creaked in a circle and gave way to darkness, in basins of water that rippled even when the wind was still. One widow in Berrenshire claimed her wash basin sang to her, not loudly, just under the water's skin, a hum like a girl brushing her hair. She poured it out, but the basin stayed full. When she reached in, she pulled out a piece of veil. Still wet, still warm. She collapsed, and when they found her, she had drawn a map on the floor in soap and blood, a map of all the missing girls, each marked with a bead, each bead full of salt water. Now the well no longer waits for visitors. It seeks them. Reflections vanish from mirrors. Girls see not themselves but others, old and veiled, brushing hair with hands that tremble not with fear, but with memory. Mothers wake to find their wells singing. The water dances not in joy, but in mourning. In witness, the kingdom's scholars tried to drain one such well last spring. They sent down pumps, buckets, even flame. The water never left. Instead, It rose slowly quietly, and floating on its surface was a bridal slipper made of ash. Inside it, a tooth, carved with the word wait. Now, girls are told not to drink from still water, not to look too long, not to listen, because the well speaks in ways deeper than sound. It reminds, it gathers, and when 13 veils are cast upon its surface, legend says it will return what it was made to hide, every name, every vow, every bride who was taken and never remembered, because the widow's eye is not blind, it sees, and it is waiting to be looked back into. In the province of Velmora, where the hills roll like sleeping beasts and the wind always carries the scent of iron and lilies, there stands a tree, not ancient, not young, not quite a tree at all. The locals call it the cross that was never blessed. Its bark is silver grey, veined like bone. Its limbs twist not toward the sun, but downward reaching to the soil as if begging for return. No birds roost in its branches. No insects crawl along its trunk. No shadow dares fall upon it. It grows in the middle of a field where no other tree will grow. And at its roots, shoes. Hundreds of them, small, pale, soft. Children's shoes, slippers, satin. Threadbare. Some still dusted with bridal lace, others scorched, others sewn shut at the toe as if to keep the foot from ever leaving. Every year, more appear. No one sees who brings them. They simply arrive at night, always in 13s. There are no executions in Velmora, not since the tree came, because those who harm the innocent, those who force the bridal rite upon the unwilling vanish. Not in light in quiet. Their homes are found empty, with the doors ajar, and a single slipper placed neatly on the pillow. Sometimes, when the wind howls, villagers say they see silhouettes walking toward the treat all men. Noblemen, priests, lords with heads bowed, hands bound in veil thread, and when the wind dies, the shoes multiply, one pair for every step closer to justice, or remembrance. No blood is ever found, only the faint scent of bridal perfume and the echo of combs through dry hair. A midwife once dared to cut a branch from the tree, believing it cursed. She burned it in her hearth. The flames screamed, not like fire, like a girl. The midwife fell ill the next day. Her skin peeled in ribbons. When she died, her last words were, she said, "Do not cut what mourns." The tree never bled, but its bark darkened, and that night every girl in the province dreamed of the same thing. A procession of veiled children walking backward in a circle around the tree, dropping petals made of ash. When they awoke, each had a single strand of hair coiled in their pom grey, perfumed, and tied with thorns. Scholars from the capital came to study the tree. They dug around it, took samples, tried to count the shoes, but they could not. Every time they turned away and looked back, the count had changed. The tree itself moved, not uprooted, not shifted, turned to face them, and on its lowest limb, a new pair of shoes appeared, polished, black, lined with silver. Men's shoes. No one claimed them. No one returned from the dig. Only their tools remained, wrapped in bridal veils. Now, on the 13th day of every harvest moon, the women of Velmora leave gifts beneath the tree, not offerings. Reminders, comb teeth, veil scraps, bits of ribbon, and for each item they whisper a name of a girl no one else remembers. They call it the naming, and when the last whisper fades, the branches of the tree shiver, not in wind, in acknowledgement, because the tree does not hold bodies, it holds memory. It does not punish, it keeps count, and it is waiting for the day when the names run out, and the shoes stop, and the last veil is hung from its lowest limb, never to fall again. Beneath the abandoned manor of House Elbrick, long since swallowed by ivy and time, there lies a cellar no architect remembers designing. The stone above it has cracked. The earth around it has forgotten, but still it remains. No one recalls when it first appeared, only that the doors to it are always locked from the inside. The villagers call it the bride's vault. They say it hums at night, not like music, like breath, shallow, rhythmic, as though someone or something within is waiting to be let out, or perhaps let remembered. There is no stairway, Only a square mouth of darkness in the floor, ringed by handprints small, pale, and scorched into stone, as if 100 girls once tried to claw their way free, or back in. No one enters willingly, but they hear it, and sometimes they answer. It began with whispers. A girl named Cyril, 13, betrothed to a merchant 30 years her senior, began to speak in her sleep, not nonsense, not dreams, lists, names, dates, dowry ledgers, terms of betrothal, all correct, all real, but none belonging to her. They were from contracts burned centuries ago, erased from the kingdom's memory. During the Great Reconciliation, she had never read them, but her mouth knew. One night, she rose from her bed, walked barefoot to the edge of the forest, and placed her hand against a stone half buried in moss. She whispered, "She is still down there," and the stone opened, not split, not cracked, opened, revealing a tunnel slick with condensation, lined with hair not growing from the walls, but woven into them. She did not scream. She stepped inside and vanished. 3 days later, the manor of House Elbricht collapsed, or rather, sank, into itself, as if the foundation had been hollow all along. Only one thing was left, standing, the cellar door, still sealed, still whispering. On its surface, 13 handprints had appeared, fresh, smelling faintly of rosewater and ash, and carved beneath them, "Not every bride goes quietly." The Sisters of the Pale Cloister sent their bravest archivist to investigate. She lowered herself into the vault by rope, carrying with her a lantern, a vial of salt, and a name written on wax. Ameline of House Bray vanished in 1143, 3 days after her 12th birthday. The rope went slack, then tense, then slack again. When they pulled it back, it was wet with something thick and pale, not blood, not water, something like milk, but clotted and coiled around it, a veil, hand-stitched, laced with thorns, and threaded with a phrase repeated again and again in uneven script. "I am not ready. I am not ready. I am not ready." The archivist was never found, but her name appeared in the register of unwed widows the following dawn, written in salt. Now, girls across the region dream of the vault. They see themselves walking its halls, barefoot, holding combs made of glass and shadow. In the dream, they are not afraid. In the dream, they are waiting. For what? For the 13th song to be sung, for the last contract to be broken, for the vault to unlock not from within but from without. They call it the bridal return, a moment not of vengeance, but of reckoning, because somewhere in the vault the first bride still walks, not dead, not forgotten, but collecting names like pearls, waiting for someone to say them out loud, to unbury them from silence, to remind the world that no cellar is ever truly empty if memory still breathes in the walls. And when the vault opens, it won't be a scream that escapes, it will be a choir. In the crumbling west gallery of the Royal Museum of Aranthea, behind velvet ropes and thick glass, there hangs a painting no one remembers commissioning. Its canvas is cracked, its frame heavy with iron and thorns. It bears no artist's signature, no date, no title, only a brass plaque that reads, "Her name was not written down." At first glance, the painting is simply a portrait of a young girl seated in bridal finery, pale hands folded, eyes lowered, lips drawn tight as if resisting a sob. Behind her, a garden in twilight, wilting roses, a comb half buried in moss, a veil caught in a thorn bush. But look longer, and the details shift. The expression changes, the eyes lift. The mouth tightens not in sorrow, but in something sharper, resolve. Curators noticed it first. Each night, the painting seemed to cage, not in decay, but in memory. One day, the background bore a new figure, a man, shadowed, smiling to wide. The next, he was gone, and in his place, a ring of girls holding hands, their veils aflame. Eventually, they stopped cataloguing the changes. They couldn't keep up. Then came the night the museum went silent. No alarms, no lights, just stillness. The guards patrolling the west wing never returned. Their keys were found beneath the painting, rusted, knotted in bridal ribbon, and in the corner of the canvas. 13 new names had appeared. barely legible, all names of noble girls whose portraits had once lined the gallery wall and were now missing. Not stolen, erased. Their frames remained empty. Dust imprints where canvas used to hang. But their images had migrated into her, into the portrait. Now, when one stands before it, they see not one girl but many, layered, overlaid. 13 veils, 13 sets of eyes, all watching, all waiting. A scholar once tried to photograph the painting. The film came out blank. The image refused reproduction. But when he developed the negatives in a darkroom days later, he found his own daughter's face in place of the girl's. She was smiling, wearing a veil. She had been missing for a week. Now, the painting has become something more than canvas. It is pilgrimage. Survivors come to it quietly, privately. Mothers dot sisters. Brides who ran. They do not pray. They stand dot and wait until the girl in the painting meets their gaze. And then they nod and leave something behind. A ribbon, a hairpin, a note pinned to the museum wall with comb teeth. Each one says something different. I remember her. She said no. We are not gone. It was not a blessing. And most chillingly, she's not in the painting anymore, because now, some say, the girl no longer looks out. She looks past, as if watching someone behind you, as if the canvas is no longer a prison, but a passage. And the next time she changes, it won't be to show sorrow or warning. It will be to step forward. And when she does, she will not be alone. She will bring the 12 others with her, their veils no longer white, their mouths no longer closed, their names stitched not into silk but into stone, into soil, into history itself. And the painting will not hang in silence, it will speak. At the highest spire of the abandoned summer palace in Calvin Manor, little more than stone ribs, and wind there stands a dining hall untouched by rot. No one cleans it, no one dares, and yet the room is immaculate, dustless, preserved in time like a mausoleum for memory. A single, endless table stretches from one end of the hall to the other, draped in silks yellowed by candlelight. Upon it, plates of untouched food, goblets half-filled, knives arranged like miniature gravestones. 13 place settings, always 13, never more, never less, each with a name card written in ink that never fades. But the names are shifting. One day, Lady Arceline of Varenhold. The next, Bride No. 6. Sometimes only a single word erased. And yet the chairs remain empty, or seem to be, because sometimes when the wind stops howling and the air holds its breath, a whisper travels down the table fork to glass to blade to plate. Laughter low hollow familiar. The kind of laughter girls once used to stifle in each other's arms before their wedding day, before they knew what the veil really meant. A maid once dared to clean the room. Young and knowing, she polished a goblet and found her own name etched into the glass. She dropped it. The goblet didn't shatter. It screamed. That night, she vanished. In her place, a new name card at the table. The soup before it still steamed. There are stories that once a year, on the 13th night after midsummer, the chairs are no longer empty. Figures gather, not ghosts, not brides. Brides undone. Girls half shadow, half blood, wrapped in veils woven from unspoken truths and torn contracts. They do not eat. They do not speak. They listen to something beneath the table. A sound like bone grinding against silk. A story being chewed, one bite at a time. In the morning, the food is untouched but the silverware has moved. Knives pointing north, spoons twisted into spiral shapes, and once a comb lay across a porcelain plate, its teeth embedded in a slice of wedding cake that had turned black overnight. Beneath it, scrawled in dried icing, "We are still hungry." Scholars called it a haunting, but they are wrong. Hauntings repeat. This evolves the place. Settings update. New names appear fresh ink. Modern calligraphy. A merchant's daughter. A factory bride. A child promised in exchange for land rights. One name was added before the wedding ever took place, and when the ceremony was cancelled due to unexplained illness, the name vanished. But the chair stayed empty. Waiting. Now, some bring offerings to the table. Mothers leave lockets. Sisters leave shoes. A girl once placed her own engagement ring upon the charger before her. It cracked, then vanished, and that night she dreamed of herself seated at the table older, taller veilers, holding a knife, not to use, to return. The palace has no guards. It needs none. The room defends itself. Those who enter with hunger for power or coin never return. Only their reflections remain in the wine glasses, in the silverware, twisted into expressions of regret. But those who enter with grief, they see them, the 13-seated whole, waiting not to be avenged but to be named. And when the final place is filled, when all the names are spoken aloud, not in whispers, but in witness, the table will shift. Not flip, not burn, not collapse. It will become an altar, and every contract ever signed in silence will be laid upon it, to be judged not by law, nor king, nor God, but by the brides themselves. It began with a single sound, not a scream, not a bell, not a cry for mercy, a clink sharp small final, like the fall of a comb onto stone. Then another, all across the kingdom, from the lowest peasant hut to the highest noble tower, from abbeys to bathhouses, brothels to ballrooms, combs began to fall, off shelves, from hands, out of drawers, old combs buried in dust, ivory combs passed from mother to daughter, wooden ones soaked in lavender oil, broken ones mended with ribbon. They dropped as if cold, as if gravity itself had shifted, as if memory had become heavier than silence. And then the wind began, not the cold wind of winter, the bride wind, warm, sweet, bitter. It carried the scent of old perfume, candle smoke, lace stored long in cedar, and something deep assault, sorrow and hope nailed shut. It rolled through the streets. It slipped into bedchambers. It whispered through keyholes, and it carried a voice, not one voice, 13, soft, calm, not angry, but certain. We remember. At the pale cloister, the sisters woke to find their candles burning upside down, flames rising into the stone floor. The register of unwed widows was open, pages fluttering, and one by one the names began to glow, not in blood, in light, and then disappear, released, freed, named at last. In the palace, the queen's mirror cracked, not shattered, opened. She looked into it and saw not herself, but the girls who had come before her, the ones whose faces had never been painted, whose voices had never been recorded, whose feet had never walked freely down the aisle. They smiled. She wept, and picked up her crown, and set it down forever. Throughout the realm, veils began to unravel, not torn, unmade, threads pulled gently as if by unseen hands, lace falling like snow from shelves, wedding gowns whispering as they collapsed into themselves, contracts curled into ash without fire. The names were being taken back, not stolen, returned, and the girls, they began to rise, not from graves, from forgetting. Girls thought to have vanished in rivers, in forests, in fires appeared on doorsteps, barefoot, eyes clear, carrying nothing but combs and words once forbidden. They remembered. Not everything, just enough, a name, a song, a ribbon, a sister, a self, and they sang, not in chorus, in harmony, their voices carrying across the kingdom, softening walls, splitting silence, unraveling centuries of obedience sewn into bone. It was not a rebellion, it was a homecoming. By morning, every bridal house was empty, every comb returned, and on every threshold where a girl had once been sent away, a new item lay waiting, a single card, no flourish, no seal, only a sentence. If she had been heard, she would still be here, and on the back, she is now. The kingdom did not fall, it did not burn, it did not rage, it shifted, as if waking from a long, fevered dream, as if exhaling after generations of holding breath. There were no more vial makers, there were story keepers. Girls no longer taught to bow, they were taught to remember, and to teach the art of naming, because names once lost become cages, and names when spoken become keys. And so it was that in the quiet of a new dawn, as the first sun kissed the earth where a veil had once been buried, the final comb fell. Not to break Dot to begin, and this time it did not land on stone. It landed in an open hand, Dot waiting, Dot ready, Dot free.